The wind carried whispers of rain as Penelope Rose stepped onto the dusty main street of Paso Robles, California, clutching her medical bag with white-knuckled determination. The year was 1878, and the frontier town nestled in San Luis Obispo County was still finding its footing in the rapidly changing West. Her auburn hair whipped around her face as she squinted toward the gathering storm clouds, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil in her heart. "Miss Rose." The shout came from across the street, where Sheriff Miller waved frantically. "We need you at the saloon. There's a man down with fever, looks bad." Penelope quickened her pace, her skirts swishing through the dirt. At 24, she was the only trained nurse in 50 miles, having arrived just 3 months prior from Boston. Her father's death had left her with little choice but to accept her uncle's invitation to join him in California. Uncle Thomas had promised a practice full of respectable ailments, not drunken brawlers and gunshot wounds. "Who is it this time?" she called as she approached the sheriff. "Yates Dawson," Miller replied grimly. "Ornery bastard rode in half, dead this morning. Got himself shot and fevers set in something fierce." The name struck her like a physical blow. Even in her short time in Paso Robles, she'd heard whispers of Yates Dawson, the harsh, unforgiving bounty hunter who'd left a trail of captured outlaws and broken hearts across 3 states. They said his eyes were as cold as a mountain stream and twice as dangerous. "Take me to him," she said, swallowing her apprehension. The Iron Horse Saloon was unnaturally quiet as they entered, the usual cacophony of piano music and drunken laughter replaced by hushed murmurs. Men parted like water as Penelope followed the sheriff toward the back room. "Don't expect any gratitude, Miss Rose," Sheriff Miller warned. "Dawson's not known for his manners, even when he's not burning up with fever." Penelope squared her shoulders. "I don't need gratitude to do my job, Sheriff." The small back room smelled of whiskey and sweat. On a narrow cot lay the infamous Yates Dawson, his tall frame barely fitting the makeshift bed. His face was flushed with fever, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a bloodied bandage wrapped haphazardly around his left shoulder. Despite his weakened state, she could see why women from El Paso to Sacramento spoke his name in hushed tones. His features were strikingly handsome, a strong jawline covered in stubble, high cheekbones, and full lips currently pressed in a grimace of pain. "Everyone out," she ordered, setting down her bag. "I need space to work." The men shuffled out reluctantly, curiosity etched on their faces. Only the sheriff remained hovering by the door. "Where was he shot?" she asked, already removing her gloves. "Ambush outside of town. Seems a bounty he collected last month had friends." Penelope nodded, approaching the bed cautiously. Yates Dawson's eyes flew open, suddenly piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut right through her. "No. Doctors," he growled, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Good thing I'm a nurse then," she replied steadily, meeting his gaze. "Now lie still, Mr. Dawson, or you'll bleed to death before the fever has a chance to kill you." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips before pain overtook him again. "Feisty little thing, aren't you?" "Sheriff, I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and my supplies from the clinic," she instructed, ignoring the bounty hunter's comment as she began examining the wound. "And ask Mrs. Winters to brew some willow bark tea." The next few hours blurred together as Penelope worked to clean and treat the gunshot wound. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, but infection had set in. Yates drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering incoherently or cursing when the pain broke through his delirium. As night fell, Penelope refused all offers to be relieved of her duty. Something about Yates Dawson's vulnerability struck a chord within her. This man who struck fear in the hearts of outlaws across the West now depended on her entirely. "You're a stubborn man, Mr. Dawson," she whispered as she replaced the cool cloth on his forehead, "but I can be stubborn too." Through the night, she battled the fever that raged through him. Twice she thought she'd lost him, only for him to rally with a strength that amazed her. By dawn, his fever had broken, though he remained unconscious. Penelope dozed in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion finally claiming her. She awoke to the sensation of being watched. Opening her eyes, she found Yates Dawson's intense blue gaze fixed upon her face. "You stayed," he said simply, his voice weaker than before but clearer. "Of course I stayed. That's what nurses do," she replied, reaching for the water pitcher. "Not for men like me," he countered, wincing as he tried to shift his position. She helped him take a sip of water, supporting his head with a gentleness that seemed to surprise him. "Men like you bleed the same as any other." For 3 days, Penelope tended to Yates Dawson. The townsfolk whispered about the ice-hearted bounty hunter and the Boston nurse, but she paid them no mind. She learned to navigate his gruff exterior, to recognize the signs of pain he tried to hide, and to understand when his harsh words masked vulnerability. On the 4th day, she arrived to find him sitting up, attempting to button his shirt with one hand. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, setting down her bag. "Leaving," he stated flatly. "I've imposed on your time enough. You'll tear your stitches and then all my work will be for nothing." She moved to stop him, her hands light but firm on his uninjured shoulder. "I've survived worse with less care," he insisted, though he stopped struggling. "That doesn't mean you should," Penelope sighed, stepping back. "At least let me check your wound before you go galloping off to get yourself killed." A rare smile touched his lips, transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. "You've got quite a way with words, Miss Rose." "So I've been told, Mr. Dawson." She gestured for him to unbutton his shirt. "Now, please." He complied with surprising obedience, watching her face as she examined the healing wound. Her fingers worked efficiently, but there was a tenderness in her touch that made his breath catch. "You've melted more than my pain, you know," he said quietly, capturing her wrist as she withdrew her hand. "No one's shown me such kindness in a very long time." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Penelope felt color rising to her cheeks as she gently extracted her hand from his grasp. "Rest one more day," she instructed, her professional tone belied by the slight tremor in her voice. "Doctor's orders, nurse's orders," he corrected, that faint smile appearing again. "And I suppose I'd be a fool not to follow them." The next morning, Penelope arrived at the saloon to find Yates gone. The only evidence of his stay was a small, folded note on the pillow. "Thank you, YD." She told herself the hollowness in her chest was merely disappointment at losing a patient before full recovery. It certainly wasn't because she'd grown accustomed to his gruff voice or the rare smiles that transformed his face. 3 weeks passed without word of Yates Dawson. Penelope threw herself into her work, tending to the usual ailments of the growing town childbirth, broken bones from the nearby ranches, and the occasional knife wound from saloon disagreements. Spring brought with it a wave of influenza, keeping her busy day and night. She was returning from the miller's farm, where their youngest had finally turned the corner, when she spotted a familiar figure leaning against the hitching post outside her small clinic. Yates Dawson stood straighter as she approached, his hat in his hands. He looked healthier than when she'd last seen him. His face had lost its pallor, and he carried himself with the easy confidence she'd heard about but never witnessed. "Mr. Dawson," she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. "I trust your shoulder has healed." "It has, thanks to your care." He gestured to her door. "May I?" Curious, Penelope unlocked the clinic and led him inside. In the light streaming through the windows, she noticed the changes in him more clearly. His clothes were clean, his hair trimmed neatly, though he still carried the dangerous air that marked him as a man not to be crossed. "What brings you back to Paso Robles?" she asked, setting down her bag. Yates placed something on her desk, a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. "I wanted to thank you properly." "That's not necessary." "It is," he interrupted firmly. "You saved my life, Miss Rose. Not many would have bothered with a man like me." She opened the box to find a delicate silver pendant nestled inside. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept, please," he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before: vulnerability. "It was my mother's, one of the few things I've kept all these years." Penelope studied his face, seeing beyond the hard exterior to the man beneath. "Why would you give me something so precious?" "Because what you do, it's precious too." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and pine. "I've been thinking about what you said, about men like me bleeding the same as others." She waited, heart hammering in her chest. "I've been bleeding for a long time, Penelope, inside where no one can see." His voice dropped lower. "But for some reason, when you were caring for me, that bleeding stopped for a while." Before she could respond, the clinic door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, breathing hard. "Miss Rose, there's been an accident at the Henderson Ranch. They need you straight away." Duty called, as it always did. With an apologetic look at Yates, she grabbed her medical bag. "I have to go," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Go." The Henderson Ranch crisis, a wagon accident that had left 3 ranch hands injured, kept Penelope occupied through the night and into the next day. By the time she returned to town, exhaustion weighed on her so heavily that she almost missed the note tacked to her clinic door. "Supper at the hotel restaurant, 7 o'clock. YD." It was nearly that time already. Penelope hesitated, knowing she looked a fright after her long hours at the ranch, but something pushed her forward, toward the small hotel that served as Paso Robles' finest dining establishment. Yates was waiting at a corner table, rising when he saw her enter. His eyes took in her disheveled appearance with warmth rather than judgment. "You came," he said simply, pulling out a chair for her. "I almost didn't," she admitted, sinking gratefully into the seat. "I've been at the Henderson Ranch since we spoke." Concern crossed his features. "Have you eaten? Slept?" She shook her head, touched by his worry. "Not much of either." Without hesitation, Yates signaled the waiter and ordered a meal. Then he looked back at Penelope with a small smile. "I won't keep you long. I just wanted to see you before I ride out tomorrow." Disappointment stabbed through her fatigue. "You're leaving again?" "I have a job in Sacramento." He hesitated, then added, "But I thought perhaps when I return." The waiter arrived with food, and Penelope realized how hungry she was. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before she found the courage to ask, "When you return, what?" Yates set down his fork, his expression serious. "When I return, I thought I might stay in Paso Robles for a while, if there's a reason to." Their eyes met across the table, and the meaning behind his words was clear. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "I believe the town could always use good men, Mr. Dawson." "And would the town's nurse have any objection?" he pressed gently. "None whatsoever," she replied softly. "Though she might wonder what a man like you would do in a quiet town like Paso Robles." Yates leaned forward, his voice low. "I've been thinking about that. A man with my skills might be useful to the sheriff. Or perhaps I could try my hand at something entirely different." He paused. "The truth is, I'm tired of hunting men, Penelope. Tired of living by the gun." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Penelope reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Then don't." Something shifted in Yates's expression, hope, perhaps, or relief. He turned his hand beneath hers until their palms met, fingers intertwining. "It won't be easy. My reputation follows me." "Good things rarely come easily," she replied, "but they're worth fighting for." The next morning, Penelope stood on the porch of her small rented home, watching as Yates mounted his horse. He looked different in the early light, less the dangerous bounty hunter and more a man at a crossroads. "2 weeks," he promised, tipping his hat. "Just long enough to finish this last job and collect what I'm owed." "I'll be here," she said simply. True to his word, Yates Dawson returned to Paso Robles exactly 14 days later. He arrived not with the fanfare of a notorious bounty hunter, but quietly, in the late afternoon, a wagon of supplies trailing behind his horse. Penelope was treating young Tommy Fisher's broken arm when Sheriff Miller appeared at her clinic door. "Miss Rose," the sheriff said, a bemused expression on his weather-beaten face. "You've got a visitor waiting at your house. Seems Dawson's back and he's brought half a general store with him." She finished setting Tommy's arm before hurrying home, her heart racing with anticipation. There she found Yates unloading crates from a wagon, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "What is all this?" she asked, gesturing at the supplies. He straightened, wiping his brow. "I figured if I'm staying, I ought to be useful." He pointed to various crates. "Medicine, bandages, supplies for your clinic," and he hesitated, suddenly uncertain some things for a house, a proper one. Penelope's breath caught. "A house? I bought the old Jenkins property on the edge of town." His eyes held hers steadily. "It needs work, but the land is good. Room for a garden, maybe some horses." "You're really staying," she said, the realization washing over her like a warm wave. "If you'll have me." He took a step closer. "I've spent my whole life drifting, Penelope. Never thought I'd want to stop until I woke up in that saloon room with you looking after me." The weeks that followed saw a transformation in both Yates Dawson and Paso Robles itself. The feared bounty hunter took on odd jobs around town while renovating the old Jenkins house. He helped Sheriff Miller track down a gang of cattle rustlers, using his tracking skills to lead the posse rather than hunting alone. And every evening, he could be found on Penelope's porch, sharing stories of his day as they watched the sunset. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectably, under the watchful eyes of the townsfolk. Yates proved himself to be a man of surprising depths, well-read, thoughtful, and possessed of a dry wit that made Penelope laugh like she hadn't since before her father's death. Spring turned to summer, and with it came both bounty and challenge. A drought settled over San Luis Obispo County, bringing with it wildfires that threatened the outlying ranches. Yates organized the men of Paso Robles into firefighting brigades, while Penelope tended to those overcome by smoke and heat. It was during one such fire that their relationship faced its first true test. Yates had gone with the men to help the Hendersons save their barn, only to be caught in a sudden shift of wind that drove flames through the dry grass toward them. Word reached town that there were men trapped, and Penelope didn't hesitate. She hitched a wagon and drove toward the billowing smoke, medical supplies rattling beside her. The scene that greeted her was chaos, men shouting, horses neighing in panic, and thick smoke obscuring everything. "Where's Yates?" she demanded, grabbing the nearest ranch hand. The man pointed toward the burning barn. "Inside. Henderson's boy was trapped. Dawson went in after him." Terror gripped her heart as she stared at the inferno. Before she could move, figures emerged from the smoke. Yates, carrying 8-year-old Samuel Henderson, both covered in soot and coughing violently. Penelope rushed forward, helping them to her wagon. Samuel was quickly reunited with his frantic parents, suffering only minor burns and smoke inhalation. But Yates collapsed once the boy was safe, His breathing labored. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she examined him. "You could have been killed." His soot-stained face cracked into a weak smile. "Couldn't. Let the boy die." She worked frantically, treating his burns and clearing his lungs. For the second time, she found herself fighting to save Yates Dawson's life, though this time her heart was fully invested in the outcome. When they returned to town, she refused to leave his side, setting up a cot in her clinic so she could monitor him through the night. By morning, his breathing had eased, though angry red burns marked his hands and forearms. "You're going to have scars," she told him as she applied salve to his wounds. Yates caught her hand, his gaze intense despite his weakened state. "I've got plenty of those already. They're just reminders that I survived." "You almost didn't," she said, her voice breaking. "I almost lost you." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm harder to kill than that, Penelope Rose." "Don't joke," she scolded, but relief made her voice gentle. "When I heard you were in that barn, I thought of you," he admitted quietly. "In those moments when I couldn't see through the smoke, when the heat was so intense I thought my lungs would burst, I thought of your face. It gave me strength to find the boy and get out." Penelope looked into his eyes and saw something she'd never expected to find in Yates Dawson: love, pure and unguarded. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, tender and filled with promise. When she pulled back, his expression was one of wonder. "What was that for?" "For coming back to me," she whispered. The drought broke a week later, rain pouring down in blessed sheets that doused the remaining fires and brought life back to the parched land. Yates recovered quickly under Penelope's care, though he complained good-naturedly about her strict regimen. As summer gave way to fall, the Jenkins house, now the Dawson house, took shape. Yates had proven himself handy with tools, and what skills he lacked, he made up for in determination. The townsfolk, who had once eyed him with suspicion, now greeted him warmly. Children followed him around town, begging for stories of his adventures, which he edited carefully for young ears. On a crisp October evening, Yates invited Penelope to dinner at the completed house. She arrived to find the place transformed. Lanterns lit the pathway to the door, and inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. The table was set for two, with wildflowers in a mason jar as a centerpiece. "You did all this?" she asked, taking in the homely touches that softened the rugged construction. "With some help," he admitted. "Mrs. Miller had opinions about curtains." Penelope laughed, imagining the sheriff's wife instructing the former bounty hunter on home decor. "It's beautiful, Yates, truly." They ate a simple meal that he'd prepared himself: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread from the town bakery. As they finished, Yates grew uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his napkin. "I have something to ask you," he said finally, reaching into his pocket. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Penelope. My life before Paso Robles, before you, it wasn't one I'm always proud of, but you saw something in me worth saving, and I'll spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of that faith." He produced a small ring, simple but elegant, a band of gold with a single pearl set within it. "I can't offer you wealth or a distinguished name, but I can offer you my heart, my protection, and my promise to love you until my last breath. Penelope Rose, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the man before her, so different from the harsh, fever-ridden bounty hunter she'd first met. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." They were married on the first day of November 1878 in the small church of Paso Robles. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union of the gentle nurse and the reformed bounty hunter. Penelope wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Miller had helped her make, while Yates looked almost uncomfortable in his new suit, though his eyes never left his bride's face. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Miller remarked at the reception. "Yates Dawson, family man. The world's changing faster than I can keep up." Yates, his arm around his new wife's waist, merely smiled. "Some changes are worth embracing, Sheriff." Winter settled over Paso Robles, bringing with it both challenges and joys for the newlyweds. The clinic remained busy, with Yates often accompanying Penelope on her more distant house calls. He proved to be an able assistant, his steady hands and calm demeanor a comfort to patients and to Penelope herself. Their home became a haven, not just for them but for those in need. When 3 orphan children arrived on the stage from San Francisco, bound for relatives who never materialized, it was the Dawsons who took them in temporarily. "Temporarily might become permanently," Penelope observed one evening, watching Yates teach 10-year-old William how to whittle while the younger children, Emma and Joshua, played with blocks on the floor. Yates looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Would that be so bad?" She crossed the room and kissed him softly. "Not bad at all." The legal adoption of the children was finalized in the spring of 1879, transforming the Dawson household overnight from a couple to a family of 5. Yates took to fatherhood with surprising ease, his protective nature finding a new purpose in caring for his instant family. "You're a natural," Penelope told him as they stood on their porch, watching William help the younger children fly a kite in the meadow behind their house. Yates slipped an arm around her waist. "They make it easy. They're good kids who have had a hard time." His voice grew softer. "Like someone else I know." She leaned into him, grateful for his understanding. The loss of her father, the uprooting of her life in Boston, he understood how those wounds had shaped her, just as his own past had shaped him. Their family continued to grow in unexpected ways. In late summer, Penelope confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks: she was with child. Yates's reaction was one of stunned joy, followed by a fierce protectiveness that made her laugh and scold him in equal measure. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him repeatedly as he insisted on taking over her more strenuous duties. "Humor me," he would reply, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I've never had so much to lose." The pregnancy progressed well into the winter months. The children were excited about their new sibling, with Emma often pressing her ear to Penelope's growing belly to hear the baby talking. William, now 11, took his role as eldest very seriously, helping Yates with chores and watching over his siblings when Penelope needed rest. Christmas of 1879 found the Dawson home filled with light and laughter. The adopted children had never experienced such abundance, and Yates and Penelope delighted in creating traditions that blended her Eastern upbringing with the simpler frontier celebrations. As they sat before the fire that Christmas night, children asleep in their beds and presents scattered about, Yates placed his hand on Penelope's rounded belly. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. "When you were treating that ornery bounty hunter with fever?" She covered his hand with hers. "Never. Though I did think you had the most remarkable eyes I'd ever seen, even when they were glaring at me." He laughed softly. "I thought you were a vision. Wasn't sure if you were real or if the fever was making me hallucinate an angel." "Some angel," she scoffed. "I believe I threatened to let you bleed to death." "Like I said," he murmured, kissing her temple, "an angel." Their child, a son they named Thomas James Dawson, arrived in early February during a rare snowfall. The birth was difficult, lasting nearly 2 days and leaving Penelope exhausted. Yates paced outside the bedroom where the midwife worked, his face gray with fear until the cry of his newborn son pierced the tension. When finally allowed to enter, he approached the bed where Penelope lay holding their child with reverence. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "And you're miraculous." Penelope smiled tiredly. "We did this together." "No," he said firmly, sitting beside her and gathering his family close. "You did the hard part, just like you did when you saved my life." His voice caught. "You've given me everything, Penelope, everything worth having." Spring brought new changes to Paso Robles and to the Dawsons. The railroad's expansion meant growth for the town, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Yates, having officially joined Sheriff Miller as a deputy the previous year, found himself busier but still determined to be present for his family. Penelope adjusted to motherhood with the same practical grace she brought to her nursing. Little Thomas T.J., as his siblings called him, thrived under the love of his parents and the adoration of his older brothers and sister. On a warm evening in May, as their garden burst with new life, Penelope found Yates sitting on their porch swing, baby T.J. asleep against his chest. The sight still struck her heart. This hard man, once feared across the West, now gently cradling his son. "The children are finally asleep," she said, joining him on the swing. "William wanted 3 stories tonight." Yates smiled, shifting slightly to make room for her. "He's curious about everything. Reminds me of someone else I know." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the swing creaking gently as Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. "I received a letter today," she said finally, "from my cousin in Boston. She's scandalized that I married a former bounty hunter and adopted 3 orphans all in the space of a year." Yates tensed slightly. "Do you ever regret it, leaving Boston, ending up here?" She lifted her head to look at him directly. "Not for a single moment. My life there was prescribed. Here with you, with our family, I've found purpose and joy I never imagined." The tension left his body as he pressed a kiss to her hair. "That day you treated my fever when I woke to find you beside me. I told you that you'd melted more than my pain. Do you remember?" "Of course I do." "I meant it then, but I had no idea how true it would become." His voice grew softer as he looked out at their land, their home. "You melted the ice around my heart, Penelope. You showed me there was more to life than survival." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that had softened with happiness over the past year. "And you showed me that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where we're meant to be." The years that followed brought both joy and trials to the Dawson family. Paso Robles grew from a frontier town into a thriving community known for its mineral hot springs and fertile land. Yates eventually became sheriff when Miller retired, his reputation for fairness and unwavering justice making him respected throughout the county. Penelope continued her nursing, eventually opening a proper clinic with the help of a young doctor who arrived in 1882. Their partnership allowed her to balance her professional calling with her growing family, which expanded again in 1883 with the birth of their daughter, Clara Elizabeth. The adopted children grew into fine young adults. William, with his quick mind and steady hands, apprenticed with the town's blacksmith before opening his own shop. Emma discovered a talent for teaching and took a position at the town school after completing her education. Young Joshua, always the most adventurous, joined the cavalry at 18, though his letters home were frequent and filled with assurances to his worried parents. Through it all, the bond between Yates and Penelope only strengthened. They weathered droughts and floods, outbreaks of illness, and the normal strains of marriage and parenthood with a partnership that became legendary in Paso Robles. In the summer of 1898, 20 years after Penelope had first treated the harsh cowboy's fever, they stood together on their porch, watching their youngest children play in the yard while grandchildren toddled after them. "Did I ever thank you properly?" Yates asked suddenly, his hair now streaked with silver though his blue eyes remained as piercing as ever. Penelope, still beautiful at 44, smiled up at him. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing the man I could be rather than the man I was." She slipped her hand into his, the gesture as natural as breathing after 2 decades together. "You thank me every day with your love, your partnership, the family we built together." Yates gazed out at their land, at the home that had grown along with their family, at the town visible in the distance that had accepted and embraced them. "Not bad for a broken-down bounty hunter and a Boston nurse." "Not bad at all," Penelope agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still think you were my most difficult patient." He laughed, the sound rich and uninhibited in a way it never had been when they first met. "And you, my love, were the finest medicine I ever received." As the sun set over Paso Robles, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Yates Dawson held his wife close and reflected on the remarkable journey they had traveled together. From a fever-ridden stranger on a saloon cot to a man surrounded by love and purpose, it was a transformation he never could have imagined but would be forever grateful for. "I love you, Penelope Dawson," he whispered against her hair, "today and always." "And I love you," she replied, turning in his arms to press a kiss to his lips. "My harsh cowboy with the melted heart." Their laughter mingled with the sounds of their family, and the gentle evening breeze a harmony of joy that had begun with a fever, a compassionate touch, and words that had proven prophetic. "You've melted more than my pain." In the years that followed, the story of Yates and Penelope Dawson became something of a legend in San Luis Obispo County. Travelers passing through Paso Robles would often hear tales of the fearsome bounty hunter tamed by the gentle but determined nurse, of how love had transformed not just 2 lives but an entire community. The Dawson home remained a gathering place for family and friends, its doors always open to those in need. When Yates finally retired as sheriff in 1902, the town held a celebration that lasted 3 days, with speeches and tributes from far and wide. "They're making me sound like some kind of hero," he grumbled to Penelope as they sat at the table of honor. "If they knew what I was really like when you found me." "They know exactly what you were like," she replied, squeezing his hand. "That's what makes your story so powerful. People need to believe in redemption, Yates, in second chances." Their golden years were rich with the rewards of the life they'd built together. They traveled some to San Francisco to visit Emma and her family, to Fort Worth where Joshua was stationed, and even once all the way to Boston, where Penelope reconciled with relatives who had once disapproved of her frontier life. But always they returned to Paso Robles, to the land and home that had witnessed their love story unfold. They watched grandchildren grow, celebrated weddings and births, and mourned losses together with the same steady partnership that had defined their marriage. In the spring of 1918, as the world struggled with both war and pandemic, Yates and Penelope celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of Dawsons. At 76 and 64, respectively, they were the patriarchs of a family that had branched far beyond what either could have imagined that fever-racked night in the Iron Horse Saloon. "To think," Yates mused as they sat together that evening, watching the sunset from their porch swing, "if those outlaws hadn't ambushed me on the road to Paso Robles." "Someone else would have shot you eventually," Penelope teased, her auburn hair now entirely silver but her eyes still bright with the same spirit that had captivated him decades ago. He laughed, the sound interrupted by a slight cough. "You're probably right. I wasn't exactly making friends in those days." She studied his face, noting the pallor beneath his weathered tan. "Are you feeling all right? You've been coughing more lately." "Just old age creeping up," he assured her, though they both knew it was more than that. The Spanish influenza that was ravaging communities across the country hadn't spared Paso Robles. 2 weeks later, Yates took to their bed with a fever that reminded Penelope all too vividly of their first meeting. This time, however, she was not just a nurse but a wife fighting for her beloved husband's life. Their children and grandchildren rallied around them, but as days passed, it became clear that not even Penelope's skilled care could stem the tide. On a clear June morning, as sunshine spilled through the bedroom windows, Yates opened his eyes with unexpected clarity. "Penelope," he whispered, reaching for her hand. She was beside him instantly, her own health strained from sleepless nights of tending him. "I'm here, love." "You always were," he said, his voice weak but his eyes full of love. "From that first day, you saw something in me worth saving." Tears filled her eyes as she pressed his hand to her cheek. "And you've proven me right every day since." A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. "No regrets." "Only that we didn't have more time," she answered honestly. "But the time we had, Yates, it was magnificent." He nodded slightly, his breathing labored. "Tell the children, tell them I'm proud of all of them, and tell them our story, Penelope. How a harsh cowboy with a fever found the love of his life." "I will," she promised, her tears falling freely now. "I'll tell everyone." As the sun climbed higher, bathing the room in golden light, Yates Dawson took his final breath, his hand still clasped in Penelope's. The man who had once lived by the gun died peacefully in the home he had built, surrounded by the love he had once thought beyond his reach. Penelope kept her promise. In the years that followed, she shared their story with children, grandchildren, and anyone who would listen. She wrote it down in journals for future generations, detailing not just the romance, but the lessons they had learned together about redemption, second chances, and the transformative power of love. She lived another 12 years, remaining active in the Paso Robles community until her final days. The clinic she had established continued to serve the town, now run by her granddaughter who had followed in her medical footsteps. On a crisp autumn day in 1930, Penelope Rose Dawson passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was laid to rest beside Yates in the cemetery overlooking the town they had helped shape, beneath a headstone that bore a simple epitaph they had chosen together years before. "Love melted more than pain. It forged a family, a home, and a legacy that will endure." And endure it did. The Dawson descendants remained a prominent family in San Luis Obispo County, their history woven into the fabric of Paso Robles itself. The old Dawson house was preserved as a historical landmark, a testament to a love story that had begun with a fever and a compassionate heart. Visitors to the town would often stop to read the plaque that told of Yates and Penelope the bounty hunter, and the nurse whose unlikely romance had spawned a dynasty. Some dismissed it as frontier mythology, embellished over the decades. But those who knew the truth, who had heard the story from Penelope's own lips, or read the journals she left behind, understood that sometimes reality surpasses even the most fantastical tales. In the years and decades that followed, as the American West transformed from frontier to modern society, the legend of Yates and Penelope Dawson lived on, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, the human heart remains capable of remarkable healing, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the greatest love stories of all.